welcome back to my channel. I hope all of you are doing good and staying safe. From the title of this video, you already know what I'm going to be talking about today, and this is part 2 of my book recommendations. Back in July, I made a part 1 of the same series, and I had asked if you guys would like a second part of the same series, and so many of you responded positively, which makes me so happy to know that my YouTube family also enjoys reading and talking about books as much as I do. And I had been postponing this video for the last month or so because I had a lot of catching up on my own reading to do, and I really wanted to make a really nice list of good books that I would recommend to all of you. And I finally have my list ready, so let's dive straight into the video. The first book on my list is The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. It's a fictional book. I read this recently, and it's a really beautiful story about a 9-year-old boy named Bruno whose dad works as a commander of sorts under Hitler, and so they're a German family. And so at that age, he doesn't really understand why a certain group of people, the Germans, would hate a certain another group of people, that is the Jews. And so he doesn't really understand the violence that is going on, why the Jews are dressed differently, the ones that he sees from his bedroom window. And it's just a beautiful message that is given in the book, that is, we are all same as humans, and just because somebody looks different, sometimes we have created borders and fences, and there's a fence in the story which acts like a metaphor. And the ending is also pretty emotional. But if you're usually interested in books that talk about the Holocaust, the Nazi concentration camps, and anything surrounding World War II, I would highly recommend this book to you. It gives a very deep insight into how Jews were treated and what was going on back then through a child's perspective, and I think that's really beautiful. There might be some technical flaws if you try to look at the book that way, but the overall message behind the book is really beautiful. Now, since we're on the topic of Holocaust and books surrounding the World War II, the second recommendation on my list is The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a pretty infamous, you could say, concentration camp during the Nazi final movement. And this particular book is based on a true love story. There's this guy, the main character of the story, who knows several languages, and so in the concentration camp, they assign him to be the tattooist, and they used to tattoo numbers on the prisoners' arms. And so that is where he meets this girl and decides to finally survive this concentration camp and eventually marry her when they get out of it. And it's a very heartbreaking story when you read about what kind of treatment was given. They didn't get any food, the kind of work that they were made to do, the kind of dangers they faced on a day-to-day basis, how brutally they were treated. And it's this kind of stuff really interests me because it just helps you understand how the modern world has been shaped based on, reading history. And these kind of stories make it a bit more interesting as well. And so again, if you're interested in the Holocaust movement in general, this is a great book to read. And my third recommendation in the same genre or category, you might say, is The Diary of Anne Frank. If you haven't read it already, you definitely should. It's one of my favorite recommendations to give to any teenager because I feel like, because the book talks about a 13-year-old girl, it's really nice to read it when you're around the same age because you can just relate to the character a lot. Again, this is not fiction, it's actually diary excerpts of a 13-year-old Jew girl, Anne Frank, whose family had to leave their home in Amsterdam because the Germans were after the Jews back then. And instead of, they didn't want to obviously land up in a concentration camp. And so they went into hiding for 2 years until their location was disclosed, someone had betrayed them. And those 2 years that she spends in hiding, imagine living with around 10 people in a small attic bedroom, and just, it talks about teenage puberty, the changes, that rebellious teenager phase that you go through. She falls in love with a boy, she doesn't really like her mom, all of those feelings that you can relate to as a 13-year-old. It's just beautiful. And the diary actually continues when they are discovered and they actually land up in the concentration camp as well. And so the entire story behind this book being published is that after they were murdered brutally, this diary was discovered by her father, and eventually it was decided that they should publish it. And it's one of the most famous books when it comes to the Holocaust movement as to how Jews were treated and everything that they had to go through. Even talking about the book right now gives me goosebumps because The insights are so personal. It's not fiction. Nobody else has written it. It's actually diary entries. And you just end up crying while reading the book. So I highly recommend it. The next book that I would want to recommend to all of you is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And now Maya Angelou is Oprah Winfrey's mentor, the woman that she looks up to. That's how I discovered Maya Angelou, because I listen to a lot of podcasts by Oprah. And so I read her book, and like in my previous recommendations video, I recommended Becoming, and that gives us an insight into the upbringing of a Black person and what kind of neighborhood they are surrounded by and what is their upbringing and what are the difficulties that they face in the society on a daily basis. And again, since the Black Lives Movement is a pretty trending topic this year, it just helps you, prepare for your pageant as well. And even otherwise, you should definitely read such books, because it just helps you understand how the society functions in general, why certain people have a certain opinion or stance, because you need to understand different perspectives to be able to empathize and understand other problems. The news alone is not going to make you empathize. I think it's books like these which teach you how to do that, because you know where they're coming from. And so definitely give this one a read. Now my next recommendation is going to be a bit of a light read, because I don't want to recommend all really heavy motivational books. I know some of you want some really light reads as well to intersperse with your reading, which I completely understand. And so my next two recommendations are The Bookish Life of Mina Hill. I read this book recently and I honestly felt it was a book about me. Maybe that sounds too dramatic to say, but sometimes you can just relate to a character. She works in a library and she just lives alone, and she's very happy with her life just the way it is, and the kind of emotional issues that she goes through. It's a very fun, cute book. So if you're looking for a light read, I would definitely recommend this one. And my second recommendation is A Man Called Oaf. This is by Frederick Backman. I've read multiple books by this author and I love all of them, but this has to be my favorite. And the reason I love it so much is because it talks about a love story between, imagine your grandparents. I really find love stories talking about couples at that age when they've already spent, say, 50 years together, really cute. It's just much more interesting to read, honestly, than young people falling in love, which I find too cliche. And this book has such nice quotes. It's just, one of my favorite quotes from this book is, he was black and white and she was color, all the color he had. And that is how he expresses his love for his wife, who has passed away, by the way, in the book. And it's just a very beautiful story on how he's coping up with the loss of his partner. And it's just very sad, but so beautiful. So definitely give it a read if you're into, really beautiful love stories. Now my next recommendation for you guys is something that was suggested to me by my theatre sir. I mentioned in a couple of videos ago that I took theatre classes, and theatre is not just about learning acting skills, it's about understanding human psychology and human behavior in general. And it's so important to learn all of those things if you want to, be able to get into a character properly, because the script will not tell you how the character is going to behave. That comes from your own research and homework of human behavior, of course. And so the book is titled Why Men Don't Listen and Why Women Can't Read Maps. And it is such a hilarious book, and I have mixed emotions about this book, to be honest. I find it pretty sexist at times, but then whatever the author is saying, he's talking about results that have been concluded based on surveys, and it's all about biology, about how men and women are biologically so different. And while in the modern age, yes, we do talk about equality and feminism, one very good line from this book is that men and women should be equal, but that does not mean that we are the same. This book explains so many behavioral differences between men and women, and while it is funny, but it also helps you understand why the men in your life, it could be your brother, your boyfriend, your husband, your dad, anybody, why they behave a certain way. I'll give a very small example. If you've noticed, while fathers are usually driving the car, they'll ask everyone to shut up and not make so much noise. And as women, we don't understand what is the noise, like what does it have to do with your driving? You can still drive, right? And so this book explains why they cannot drive and listen at the same time, because it is biologically not possible for men to multitask as well as women. And It also explains why we have evolved this way, and it's overall such an interesting book. Again, I don't want to give away too much information. You should read it for yourself. But it's very funny and just very insightful, and it will explain so many of the relationship problems we face in general just because we think, okay, men don't understand. And so this is the answer to like so many questions that we women have. And now, since we're talking about men and women and relationships, the next recommendation that I have for you guys is The 5 Love Languages. You may have heard about this book already. It is a very famous book, and it is especially useful for people who are in a relationship. And so you should definitely give this a read, because basically what a love language is just like we use a certain language such as English or Hindi to communicate. The same thing works for relationships as well. And so there are 5 main love languages. It could be words of affirmation, it could be quality time, it could be physical touch, it could be acts of service, or it could be material gifts. And every person has a different love language, and it's important to understand what language is your partner's love language. Because, for example, if their love language is quality time, but then you just give them a lot of gifts, they are not going to feel loved, whereas you're thinking, okay, I gave her a lot of gifts, why is she not happy? So it's very important for relationship people out there. Definitely give this a read if you are in a relationship, and it will make your relationship much smoother, I would say. It helps you not just with a romantic relationship. I think even with your parents, even with your friends, you need to understand what the other person likes and not what you think they like. And so this is why I recommend this book. Now let's come back to some motivational books again. So a few more motivational book recommendations that I have for you guys is, number 1 is Shoedog by Phil Knight. He's the founder and CEO of Nike. And the book is so inspiring, guys. It talks about how Phil Knight started the company of Nike just with borrowing $50 from his father, and what was his whole vision and how it went from becoming a startup to Nike, what it is right now. The book is very inspiring. If you want to start your own business, I think it is a very good read. Or in general, you know, just to see that how he never gave up no matter how many obstacles he faced. And that is so important as life lessons in general. I just really think the more you read about successful people who have made it from scratch, who have made it huge, and just reading about their journeys teaches us a lot. It's always nice to, know what mistakes others did, what we cannot do, and it would just help us a lot in our professional journeys. And the second recommendation that I have for you in this category is Open by Andre Agassi. Andre Agassi is a very famous tennis player, and he is the husband of Steffi Graf, which I discovered after I read the book. Again, it's a very similar book on how discipline and hard work and resilience are such important qualities in a sports person to have, how he used to play despite having injuries, and the amount of commitment that you need to make it big and successful at that level in any field, actually, not just tennis. But I think sports is something that really teaches us a lot, and so definitely give it a read if you're into, really successful sports stories. Now, in my last video, that is part 1, I spoke about this book called Girl Stop Apologizing by Rachel Hollis. And a very similar book to that, if you loved that one, is another book that I've read is Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. And it is so touching and so motivating. And if you're struggling with self-love and you have a lot of self-doubt and you are constantly trying to, fit in somewhere or belong to a certain group of people, and you feel like whatever you do is not good enough and you're just trying to achieve perfection, give this book a read. It brings so much peace. When I read it, it just made me understand that perfection is something that we have created ourselves. It's not attainable, and it's just like, just think of this example. If you went to be a speaker at a certain event and you feel like you did not do well and you messed up, the more you stay silent about it and the more you try to achieve perfection at your first time, for instance, it's just going to make you really sad and frustrated, and you won't be able to love yourself, be kind to yourself the way you should be. Whereas if you just call up a friend and say, listen, you know what, I messed up and I feel horrible, and the friend just listens, one, that takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to be able to talk about your failures yourself and put it out there in front of another person. It takes a lot. And what happens when you do that is that you start inculcating values such as courage and vulnerability. Brené Brown talks about the importance of being vulnerable. Our generation especially, we are so, clinging on to not exposing our weaknesses to anyone, and it's just making life a lot more difficult than it has to be. And I highly recommend this book. It talks about how compassion is so important, both when we are talking to others and also the way we treat ourselves. So definitely give this one a read. And the last category of books that I want to recommend are mythological fiction books. Now these two are my favorite books in this category. The first one is Forest of Enchantments, and I have the book over here with me. You can see it's not that heavy. It's beautifully written. This is the story of Ramayana from Sita's perspective. Now by now all of you would know that I love women-centric books and stories and movies, and so I think it's really important to listen and hear these stories from a women's perspective. Throughout our childhood, we have heard Ramayana the way it was told to us, but did we ever think about the story from a woman's perspective in that age? How she was treated? Was she allowed to make her own decisions? What was going through her mind? And it's just so insightful. I am a huge fan of this book. And my next recommendation, a very similar book, is The Palace of Illusions. I don't have the hard copy of that one right now. That one is the narrative of Mahabharata through Draupadi's perspective, and it shakes you. It actually gives you goosebumps while reading it. Draupadi had been married to 5 men, and the amount of struggle that she went through in her life, the cheat haran that happened with her, the equation that she shared with Karna, if you're familiar with Mahabharata, all of that is explained and spoken about so beautifully, and her equation with her mother-in-law, and it's just very interesting to read about. And if you want to understand how women have always been treated a certain way and how that is still prevalent in the Indian society, how the mentality of most Indian men comes from, what type of mythological stories were taught to us as children itself, it just explains so much, and I cannot recommend these 2 books enough. And so those are all my recommendations for today. I think I recommended around 10 to 12 books in this video. If you are reading the books that I have recommended, please do tag me in your stories and posts. I am such an avid book reader, and I just love it when people are reading my recommendations. Some of you do that, and I find it so sweet. And if you have any recommendations of your own that you might want to add to this list, do add those in the comment section below. Let's just make this a huge book reader community. I would love that. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and liked it. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. Please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I am trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of December, and it would mean so much to me if you guys help me achieve that goal. I love you guys so much, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye bye.